Happy Thursday, party people! It is time for another Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, I'm happy to bring you another very special chat, and it's one that I've had on my wish list from the day this podcast started, and that's a chat with one of the core members of Nostalrius, Nano, who was kind enough to take some time out to chat with me. And special shout out to the amazing assistance of listener Forrest, who acted as the middleman in setting up the call that you're about to hear. Now, Nano was one of the people in the room for that fateful meeting with Blizzard in 2016, which was undoubtedly one of the events that helped ensure that World of Warcraft Classic became a reality. Many of you, like me, have said, man, imagine being a fly on the wall for that meeting. Well, now we get to be, as Nano winds up giving us close to a blow-by-blow recap of exactly what went on in that room. And I can assure you, this is a captivating account that may have you laughing and maybe even crying during the interview. After the call, I'll run through a few more fun memory lane stories from the listeners, and then we'll leave it there as I try to keep this one under the 90-minute mark, given that I hit you with a 3.5-hour interview on Monday with vanilla developer John Statz, which has quite frankly been flying off the shelves, so to speak, and the positive feedback from that interview from all of you has been nothing short of amazing. So thank you to everyone who downloaded, listened, and took the time to comment on that one. Thank you so much. If you're enjoying these types of in-depth conversations that Countdown to Classic brings you, then please head on over to the show's Patreon page and see how you can help support Countdown to Classic to continue to bring you more interviews just like this one. All the links you'll need are in the show's notes for each episode. If you want to hit me up with some feedback or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, you can always hit me up at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com as well. Also, find me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, and please do join the show's amazing Discord. The links again are in the show notes. If you can't get enough of me for some reason, then please do check out my other podcast, The Cinephiles. That's SINNERFILES.com. If you haven't already, for some great comedic takes on all of your favorite movies. But with all that said, get your box of Kleenex ready, as it's about to get a little misty in here for all of you who spent time on this particular legacy server, as we hear Nano narrate this summer's amazing romantic comedy smash hit, When Blizzard Met Nostalrius. Okay, it's time for another interview over here at Countdown to Classic, and this is yet another very special interview. So we're speaking today with Nano, who was a core member of the Nostalrius team. Nano, please do say hello.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on the show, mate. I really do appreciate you taking the time out for this interview and for reaching out to me. We were obviously put in touch through a listener of the show who got in touch, and I'm so thankful for that connection being made. But what I wanted to start out with this interview was basically if you could give people a little bit of a description of who you are, and when I say who you are, what your involvement with the Nostalrius project was.
Sure. So I started with the Nostalrius project just as a player. So when it initially launched, there was a conversation within the guild that I was in between Nostalrius and another private server. We decided on Nostalrius, and so I played right at launch of the server. About the time that Dire Maul was being released, the patch 1.3, I felt the desire to reach out to the Nostalrius team and offer my services in the QA department, which is question and answer, essentially, quality assurance work. So my job was to try to kind of put polish to what the rest of the Nostalrius team and the developers were doing to make the game more accurate to the way that it originally was. And shortly after I joined the QA, or as we called it, the ISVV team, the leader of that team left, and I had proved myself to the degree in the short time I was there that they asked me to take over a leadership role, and I did that.
Now, once you came into a leadership role on the team, how did that change your involvement with what was going on over at Nostalrius? How much more intensive did things get?
Quite a bit. So the team was pretty small, pretty tight-knit group of people. The core team wavered between 4 or 5 people, and then outside of the GM team, there wasn't a lot of other people that were actively involved in working on the server. Working on any video game is a lot of work. We were an international team, 2 people from France who were the leaders of the server, Damon and Viper, respectively. There was me, who lives in the DC metro area, and our head GM, who lives in Canada, and then the assistant GM, who became a part of our lead team towards the end of the project, lives in San Diego. So when you're talking about time spans and trying to coordinate how to do things, it was very difficult. Plus, we're working on one of the most well-known, well-loved video games ever in history. And it's quite a task for the 5 of us to lead our individual small teams to figure out how the heck we manage and drive this beast of a game, and with a community that frankly was astonishingly large, with loud opinions.
Well, I should say, I just remembered, Listener Forrest is the person, I forgot the name earlier and I do apologize. Listener Forrest is the person that obviously put us in touch. So a big thank you to Forrest. But, what I would say is, you just mentioned the sort of monumental task before you in managing one of the most beloved games of all time, albeit on a private server in a sort of, the situation that you were working with. A lot of people know about Nostalrius. A lot of people do know sort of the history of it. A lot of people played on it. If we can talk about what are some of the things that people don't know, when we talk about, running servers, the costs involved, the labor involved, what kind of things happen behind the scenes that people wouldn't quite know about that you had to deal with on a daily basis with your work on Nostalrius?
So one thing that people don't, so there's private servers that attempt to come up all the time to try to gather some bits of people to accomplish something. And I believe that probably most of them are doing it with a genuine sense of love for World of Warcraft. Viper and Damon specifically had a unique and strong passion for vanilla World of Warcraft, wanted to provide an opportunity for people to play that game, and put a lot of work and effort into making Nostalrius ever happen. So one thing, this is outside of the realm of actually running the server, but they spent a whole weekend learning marketing. There was a workshop in France. They both attended together, and they were learning how to actually market and advertise and do things in a way that it would actually gather attention, because they wanted to make it legit. They wanted to get people on their server, and they wanted to work hard for people. That's something that probably not many people or anybody knows. But there's a lot that goes into running these servers outside of just, coding or QA work, or especially the GM work. In terms of when the server is live, I don't think people quite have an appreciation for just how difficult it is to combat cheats, exploiters, people who are finding various loopholes to the game, and just how much time it takes for any developer, and especially a small development team, to figure out how they're doing it, to find how the issue gets resolved, and then to implement that without breaking 100 of other things. And so when people are wondering like why this raid content gets delayed, or why this fix hasn't been implemented yet, it's probably because we're hard at work trying to fix things that we can't tell you that we're fixing. Otherwise, we would encourage other people to go out of their way to exploit other things. And just how time consuming and difficult that is for the GM side, for the QA side, and for the development side.
So I won't get too deep into the details of what happened during the life cycle of Nostalrius and what happened towards the end, because people can look that up anywhere. I want to get more into what people can't read elsewhere in terms of your insight into what happened during the time. But just quickly before we go into the end of Nostalrius, while you were still at the peak of your powers, what was the reaction of the team as to how well received that project was? What were your thoughts? Was it a surprise with how much it all took off?
Yes, it was a surprise. So from initial launch, I, as a player, was hoping for 1,000 players concurrently, 1,500 players concurrently. The day of launch was more like 3,000 or 4,000, which was far more than any other vanilla private server has ever had before. And typically with the releases, you see population decreases. It peaks at the beginning because people are interested, and it falls as people are unable to complete their leveling process and everything else with their life comes. But Nostalrius kept on growing, where it went from 4,000 concurrent to 6,000 to 8,000 to 10,000 to 12,000 at times, and just exploded in this popularity. I credit that with, one, that we had very stable administration to the server. Viper and Damon, as I'll repeat this kind of phrase often, were very good leaders. They ran a tight ship. They cared passionately about the project and were not interested in anything other than giving people the opportunity to play vanilla WoW. And that was very appealing to me in joining their team, because I shared that same passion. I'm getting away from your question a little bit, so can you repeat that?
No, that's okay. You pretty much answered it just in terms of how you received the positive reception that Nostalrius got. Like, were you taken aback? And what did the positive reception of Nostalrius change anything for you in terms of your plans for the future on the fly?
Well, I had some delusions of grandeur at times, like, oh, I'm really important. I'm running helping to run a server for hundreds of thousands of people who are enjoying vanilla WoW, potentially for the first time in 12 to 14 years, which is pretty special. Ultimately, there's all kinds of rumors that I'll address kind of at the front. I am not aware that anybody is currently working for Blizzard or has any inside information on Classic WoW development or any hints to what's to come. So if there's anybody out there that's expecting that I know something about Classic WoW that they don't, they'll be disappointed, because I know nothing. And I'm not involved with Blizzard. I've maintained my same job as I had when I originally started. Not much outside of the world of video games and World of Warcraft has really changed in my life, other than the fact that I got the opportunity to be a part of something special.
Okay, so if we could move on now just quickly to the eventual demise of Nostalrius, can you describe the feeling within the team when you started to receive these, well, they were effectively cease and desist letters from Blizzard, weren't they?
Yeah, so Damon and Viper ran a tight ship, and anything from the administrative side of the server went through them. So how many C&Ds they received, or how intense the legal issues were, they kept under pretty tight wraps. They informed us of the decision that we're going to have to shut down the server. Probably about a week before we announced it to the public. And that was as shocking to me as it probably was to all the players, because throughout the time that I'm involved in the core team, I'm also an invested player in the realm and raiding with my raiding guild and accomplishing things and gearing up and enjoying the game. And so it wasn't just a loss of the work that I've been doing. It was also a loss of my players. So I really felt the same as most players did, that, something that I cared about And if you play World of Warcraft and you play this game, you get so emotionally invested in your character, and especially in Vanilla WoW, because each individual item that you earn and each level that you earn takes so much more of an investment that you're so much more emotionally attached to those things than you are, in my opinion, in the current version. Now, in the current version, there are people who've been playing the game for 14 years and playing the same character for 14 years and now have 14 years of emotional investment. But in my perception, most people are coming into the current game as more of a theme park experience. They pop in when a new ride shows up, they experience the new rides, and then things kind of peter out, and they'll come back again when the next new ride is out. And that's kind of where I'm at right now with World of Warcraft. But as far as the demise goes, it was very evident from the beginning that we weren't just going to be another private server that was going to close its doors and then never hear from them again until they decide to open up the next server, because we cared about Vanilla WoW and we wanted people to have the option to play it. And so we began to internally figure out, all right, how can we leverage our community to petition Blizzard to have a discussion for real, not just a question at BlizzCon, but have a real discussion. All right, what would it look like for your company to invest in this community? We've proved that this community exists. We proved that it isn't just a fad that people will come and do nostalgic things and then leave after 5 days, but people will come and stay invested and love the game for what it is. So because we've proven that, and we can go and prove that to you, what will you do in response to that? And that was kind of where we turned it from, we were just a popular private server to a launching pad of a classic WoW movement.
How long did it take before you started to hear rumblings that Blizzard might want to speak with you? And how did that come about?
So pretty shortly after we shut down the server, we launched the change.org petition to Mike Morhaime, and that got traction really quickly. We got big names attached to it, streamers like Soda Poppin especially, who were extremely passionate, and players on our server who enjoyed the Vanilla WoW experience. We also got one of the original WoW developers, Mark Curran, who has a unique passion for the game as well, who jumped on board and wanted to push that movement forward with what resources they had. And it was like a snowball running down a hill that all of a sudden our little change.org petition, which everybody laughed at first because they don't believe that petitions work, it got hundreds of thousands of people who were excited and joining our movement for Classic WoW. During that time that this position happened, we were reaching out through what information we could find online of email addresses and sending email addresses to people like J. Allen Brack and Mike Morhaime and Tom Chilton and Ian Hazakostas and a number of people that we could, figure out their email addresses, and we were sending emails and reaching out. And eventually, one of their PR directors reached out to us about arranging an in-person meeting at Blizzard.
Funnily enough, I was actually speaking with Mark Kern a couple of nights ago. I was chatting with him about this very point, and he is happy for me to sort of put him on the record for this part. But he mentioned that he delivered the petition to Blizzard. He'd promised to hand deliver it to Mike Morhaime, and he mentioned that when he did, he had a long talk with Mike about how to do Classic, and he vouched for you guys over at the Nostalrius team and everything that you were doing. So how did it feel to have people that were so heavily involved in the game sticking up for what you were doing?
It was special. It was humbling, for sure. In a lot of ways, I'm just another gamer who, comes home from work and plays video games, and all of a sudden I got thrust into this opportunity to make something really special happen and to really influence one of the biggest game companies in the entire world. one of the biggest companies flat out when you're talking about Activision Blizzard in the entire world. And then to see people who worked on the game originally value our work, and to, have them validate our efforts and our passion was really cool. It was really cool.
So the famous meeting was eventually set, and you guys put together what essentially was a bit of a manifesto, wasn't it? You put together a vast document about everything that you'd done to present to Blizzard. Was that something that you had a hand in preparing yourself as well?
Yes. So essentially what we put together was a really comprehensive and long PowerPoint presentation of multiple points. So each leader took a specific section of the presentation that we were going to do, created their own presentation, and when we met in Irvine, we put it all together the day before and rehearsed for like 4 hours that night into the early morning, which was really early morning for me because I was on East Coast time, so I think we went to bed at like 2 or 3 a.m. and it was like 5 or 6 for me.
When you talk about rehearsals, I'm picturing you looking at a mirror saying, "Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?" Was it something like that?
Well, so not everybody loves public speaking. It's
right.
Fear for the vast majority of people, and that was true for a couple members of our team. So a lot of time was spent helping rehearse their part of the pitch, that they would feel comfortable and confident in what they were saying, in the hopes that they would walk into the Blizzard boardroom, which included Mike Morhaime and Tom Chilton and J. Allen Brack, and be able to speak confidently about the thing that they were talking about. And that's not easy to do for anybody, especially for someone who has difficulty with public speaking. That's an intimidating thing, and it takes time to, wear down your fears and to feel prepared and excited. And so that was a large part of what we were practicing, was just like, don't waver in your voice when you're speaking, speak confidently.
Okay, so the stage was set, and the meeting comes up, and you march into Irvine with the team, and you're ready to go. Now, this is really sort of the crux of the chat that I've been dying to talk to you about, Nano, because so many people in the community have, suggested at some point that, the saying is, "Oh, I'd kill to be a fly in the room for that meeting," and everyone wanted to know what happened. And this is the point where I'm very much so going to have a million questions for you. So just talk us through. Absolutely fantastic. So you get in there, and what's the scene that you're presented with? I know that there was a great post on the Nostalrius forums about exactly who was there, but just talk everyone through, if they haven't come across that post, who was in the room.
So in the room was Mike Morhaime was the closest seat to the PowerPoint presentation that we were having. There was a couple PR people who were there. There was a community manager, Tom Chilton, Ian Hazakostas, Jay Allen Brack, their technical director, and then the 5 Nostalrius team members who were Ithlian, myself, Nano, Tyrael, Viper, and Damon, and that was the room.
Can you recall, and I appreciate this was about 2 years ago, but when you all got in that room and you've all stopped your glad handing and the air has kind of settled and everyone sat down, what was the first thing that was said or brought up?
I think Jay Allen was the first to speak and welcomed us to the room, kind of set the tone for the meeting. It's like, hey, we're here to learn about your server, to hear about how you accomplished some of the things that you accomplished, why you think that classic WoW is a thing that could be something that we would pursue. And then that was kind of, and they kind of just let us roll. So they interjected often to ask questions. There was also this potential reaction that people were thinking, "Oh, we were just invited to, make peace, and there wasn't really anything that was real." But I don't think Mike Morhaime sits in meetings that aren't ever real, and I don't think Tom Chilton or Ian Hazakostas or Jay Allen or anybody in that room would have just allowed us to come in and and spend an entire afternoon of their busy days and busy lives just talking about things that they didn't actually think about and care about. And so they were actively engaged through the whole presentation. Most especially, there's two things that really stood out. One is they were really engaged with the technical aspects on how we were accomplishing having 12,000 people on a single vanilla Warcraft server at the same time, and the work that we went through to, make it possible that the server wasn't just constantly crashing. And so there was a lot of questions about the technical details of how we were able to do what we were doing. And the second that really stood out to me is that Ian, or Watcher Dev, for those who are familiar, was so actively engaged in the whole process, was leaning forward in his chair, was asking really good, pointed questions. That significantly stood out to me, and something that I noticed and really appreciated. And so if you want more specific details, you'll have to ask, because I have a lot I could potentially talk about.
No, for sure. We'll get into it definitely. But you've gone ahead and answered what was going to be my next question. But there might be someone else as well, because I was going to ask you, is it clear that there was someone in the room that was really, really on the edge of their seat about what you were saying? And you just said that was Ian. Was there anyone else who was really, really chatty and wanted to really pick your brains? And I don't doubt that they were all invested, but was there anyone else that you could clearly say this person is here to learn?
So the technical director, and I'm forgetting his name right now, so if he ever listens to this, I sincerely apologize that I'm forgetting your name right now. He asked a ton of technical questions and was asking back and forth, and actually really impressed by some of the work that specifically Damon did to make the server architecture work for what we were doing. But Jay Allen was really invested as well. And Jay Allen, I want to just take a second here as well. Obviously, he's gotten the bad rap when it comes to classic servers, and he is aware of it. He made a joke about it.
Yep.
He referenced his famous "You think you do, but you don't." I think he said, "You think you wanted to meet me, but you didn't," at the end, which we all enjoyed and laughed about. But he was very engaged in asking kind of high level administrative questions, how we handled this, how we handled that. I think there was a genuine interest in how we were able to, as this small international team, take their baby, essentially, which is World of Warcraft, the thing that has, Blizzard was an incredible company before World of Warcraft was released, but put them on another pedestal after World of Warcraft came out, that they were really impressed that we were able to take their baby and turn it into something that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people could enjoy. One funny story is, so they actually play tested on our code, our server code, before the meeting happens. They did a dungeon run through Undead side of Stratholme. And one of the funny notes from that is, so they were all given characters, and Tom Chilton is a hunter, and Tom Chilton forgets that his pet does not instantly level up to the same level he is, that he actually has to, level up his pet. So he gets a level 23 pet and summons it in Undead Strat and instantly wipes the whole group because he's aggroing a dozen mobs, and they come in and wipe the whole group. And it was just a funny thing for us to hear about, and their experience with they're actually playing, the Blizzard people are playing on our work was really cool.
Going on from there, it's great to hear that J. Allen Brack, and I know that some listeners are aware that he has somewhat embraced the sort of absurdity of, the faux pas of his previous statement. And I think he does sort of tongue-in-cheek look back now that classic servers are coming out on his stance in the past. So just to press you a little bit more on that, is it the case that he was just as keen as everyone else in the room? And did he have any memorable questions of you during the meeting?
So to back up, I think obviously it was not a wise move to, I think what he said at that BlizzCon was, it came off as more dismissive of people's opinions and love for vanilla Warcraft, than he meant it to be. And genuinely, regrets the way that he expressed what he was saying, and his point in what it was is that I think as John was saying in the other group is that their company exists to move forward. They're creating new content, and to go back to old content is not something that most people would be able to invest a lot of time and energy and resources in. And so extrapolating that out to the population of people, they always see people asking them for more content, more content, more content. And then when they ask them for old content, they get asked to, like, can you revamp this? And then they get a bad reaction from revamping Deadmines or SFK or whatever it is. And so from their minds, like, you keep asking us for old content updated and you never like it. And that was kind of the impression that he was expressing. The other thing that really came across is that everyone there has a love for Warcraft. Especially Mike Morheim, he referred to Warcraft like he was referring to his own child, that it was something that, really put their company on a pedestal. They care about it. They cherish it. And Blizzard doesn't do anything unless they think they can do it to their standards, and their standards are very high. And so part of the discussion that happened was, all right, there was an interchange between Mike Morheim and Jay Allen Brack about, like, what do we have? Like, what actually do we have and should, like, physically, do we have game servers? Do we have patch things? Do we have client information? Do we have database information? And essentially what came was, like, they could put up a server of patch 1.12 or 121, but it would just be essentially like the skeleton of a body. So, like, it's the form of World of Warcraft, but if you were actually enter the game server, it wouldn't live. You wouldn't have any abilities. There wouldn't be any NPCs. There wouldn't be anything to do. They would just kind of just have the infrastructure of the game, but not the actual meat and bones. And that is so much more of the work that would go into, making WoW possible.
Do you recall some of the best or most eyebrow-raising questions that were brought up by anyone on the Blizzard side during the meeting?
There was a number of questions from the GM side, because the administrative part of the server is so much work, and you need so many GMs, and they don't, on the private server, they don't get paid, and they're investing tens of hours a week, 10 to 40 hours a week. Our GM team leader was devoting, like, he had a full-time job in like a freelance IT guy, and then was working on as the head GM for 40 hours a week. And our assistant GM is running his own company as like a middle 20 something, and then also investing 30 hours a week and being a GM for the server. And it's like, they were really interested in how we were actually, like, running the server, how we were investigating things, how we were logging things, because that's the kind of stuff that they deal with every day, is how do we make the GM's lives better. So one thing that I recognized and I get now is in the Burning Crusade, they added the report player AFK feature in Battlegrounds. And that didn't exist in vanilla. And there's so many hours where our GM staff would have had to go and watch individual players to see if they were AFK and Battlegrounds leeching honor, and then spend that time trying to ban them or warn them to not do that anymore. And so the development side decided, hey, let's make a new tool that will put the power in the players' hands and take it out of the responsibility of the GMs with the report player feature. And one thing that Ian said, it's like, you'd be shocked, and I get it, but you'd be shocked how much development time is spent developing tools to make GMs' jobs easier. And that was one thing that was really significant in my mind.
Were there any other features of the Nostalrius server that they seemed particularly intrigued by?
Oh, well, we had one fun exchange about Onyxia. So famously, people don't really know how Nixia's deep breath really works. And so they asked me specifically, and this was the QA part of the conversation, how we coded how deep breath worked. And to answer that question, essentially what it is, to put it in layman's terms, is that every time Nixia moves, so she moves in her flight phase and phase 2, every time she moves locations, she essentially rolls a number, and if that number rolls on deep breath, then she deep breaths. And if it doesn't, then she doesn't. That's essentially how we coded it. And then we asked them, is that how it actually works? In which they all laughed and said no. And then Ian said, like, the first thing I did when I got this job was look up how Nixia's deep breath works.
Really?
And then I asked them, so are you going to tell us how it works? And they all laughed again and said, no, we're not going to tell you.
Was there anything else you were dying to, or did you have any other cheeky questions from yourselves for them?
So we did spend some time in the middle kind of challenging them and why they've not invested the time and energy in the development of this. And one thing I've learned in the 2 years since that we've had this meeting is that things don't happen quickly in the world of game development. Everything is slow and it's difficult, and they have to be really careful from a PR perspective of when they tell people they're actually working on things. And I think John said this when you were interviewing him, is that we would all be surprised by how little people in other departments know what's going on about the game that's, being developed or worked on in another department. And so there was a little bit, looking back on it, there's a little bit of it that I think that this was something that they were at the really beginning stage of considering and doing the research to find out the market viability, could we make this return on the investment of spending the resources and time to develop a second version of the MMO that we're currently running. And then with the radio silence after that meeting, we interpreted it as that they didn't, at times we interpreted that they were losing interest, but obviously, in hindsight, they were working from that moment on to start putting, wheels on the car to make it run from that point on, and they're going to continue to do that. And so the most recent BlizzCon where they finally announced Classic servers were happening, that's not just something that just decided the week before BlizzCon, that they've been working towards that for a long period of time, and that was the point where they felt comfortable enough or where they were at in development to say that it exists at all. Because when they say something exists and they don't actually end up delivering on that, then you get another StarCraft Ghost where everybody just refers to that forever as, a failure on Blizzard's part. So they are very careful about when they actually say something to the public.
Was there any moment, and people are quite aware that the meeting, I think, was initially planned to be about 2 hours long, and it blew out to about 5 hours as you continued to plug away with them, and they obviously grew quite intrigued by the information that you were supplying them with. How did everyone in the room feel as time was going by, going well beyond that 2 hour mark? Was anything said, or was it just a constant flow of information that felt natural?
So I was not aware that we were only there for 2 hours until after the meeting, when they said that we were only booked for 2 hours. And so our meeting started at 1:00, and apparently it was supposed to finish at 3, and we left at 6. So even past normal, quote unquote, working hours, they were there. And the only thing that was, that gave me indication of that after the fact that was probably true is that Mike Morheim had to leave about midway through, and he left for about, an hour and a half, and then came back to rejoin the conversation again because he was enjoying it and was invested in what we were talking about enough that he's like, hey, they're still going? Okay, let me come back and rejoin this conversation. So I didn't know that it was only supposed to be 2 hours until they told us afterwards, like, wow, you guys really blew out your 2 hours, as a kind of a joke. But yeah, we we got the opportunity to sit in Blizzard's boardroom and talk to them about vanilla Warcraft, and we took full advantage of it.
Now, with regards to Mike Morhaime, who you referenced just there, obviously, and noting that he had to go away and come back, during the time that he was in the room, I mean, I'm picturing sort of, you know, the head of the table sitting back, just watching, smoking a cigar, just taking it all in, or was he actually quite involved in the questioning?
He was very much involved. He left a lot of the technical questions to the technical people, the game directors, and to Jay Brack, but he would ask. He was the one that expressed the most amount of awe in the work that we actually did to run the server. It was like, wow, you guys really had 12,400 some concurrent players on the same one server at a time. Like those kind of like really like highlighting some of the accomplishments that we did because that were impressive to him and vocalizing them. He didn't give any specific feedback necessarily to like individual details, I would say. But I experienced this from all of the development people, but from him also, it's like he loves World of Warcraft and he loves what we were doing and wouldn't have shut us down if he didn't have the option to not do that, if that makes sense. Like they're like legally required to go after copyright infringement. Otherwise they could lose trademarks and all that kind of stuff. So like he apologized to us for having to shut us down essentially because he appreciated the amount of passion that we had in it and the work that we put into it and like recognized that in us. But apologized like, you know, this is what we have to do this. So.
Now, it's interesting to hear that because I think that the prevailing thought, just from the vibe of it all, from the community, is that this was obviously an extending of the olive branch by Blizzard towards you. And it's interesting to hear that you say that Mike apologized to you. But I know it's maybe a stupid question, but I'm allowed one stupid question per interview. Was there any trepidation on your behalf that there was going to be any kind of animosity or challenges from them during the meeting? Or was it clear from the beginning it was all good?
So I think the person that actually had the most trepidation walking into the meeting was actually Jay Allen. I think at first at least this is my perception, so I don't know if this is reality. You'd have to ask him. But my perception is that he had a little bit of his guard up because he was fearing that we were viewing him as the boogeyman, essentially, as the man who was keeping Classic from happening. And very shortly after we began and he engaged in our conversation and asked questions and we engaged back in a respectful way that what I perceive was as his like shield and protective layer dissipated. So that was one thing. There was all kinds of jokes. So like this was a red wedding event that Blizzard was inviting us in and gonna walk us away in handcuffs. But so they specifically requested that we not sign non-disclosure agreements. Every visitor that goes to Blizzard and to most game companies, they force you to sign an NDA when you first get there because if you happen to overhear a conversation about a game that's not even going to be announced for 2 more years, like you have to sign an NDA because they have to protect their information. But they were specifically requested that we not sign an NDA because they wanted us to feel free to ask the question that we wanted to and to engage our community after the fact with this meeting because they found that valuable.
Well, I find it a little bit interesting that you mentioned there that the NDA didn't come up and that you're free to discuss anything that happened during the meeting. I found it a little bit funny that there's still a level of such mystique about this meeting, and obviously there's the big post over at the old Nostalrius forums all about what happened from you guys. But outside of that, it doesn't really seem to have been spoken about a lot. Is it something that people ask you about a lot or that comes up still to this day for you?
My guild is aware of who this in-game character happens to be now. And so every now and then they'll ask me questions about it. But as Nano, I've mostly disengaged with the private WoW community, and not. I don't have a Nano Twitter page. I'm not promoting a YouTube channel or a Twitch page. So in that regards, because I've fallen back from a public face, there hasn't been as much questions or involvement in what I was and what happens, if that makes sense.
So just going back to tying off on sort of the characters in the room, and we've touched on Mike, we've touched on Jay, and you alluded to one thing that really intrigued me was how you described Ian Hazzikostas. And one thing I'd love to delve into is it's been coming up recently with what we've gotten in Battle for Azeroth, that there's a feeling that maybe we are trending a little bit more to some old classic values in the newer expansions of the game. And people have pointed out, and a great point was raised by Stay Safe over at ClassicCast recently on this very point, where he mentioned that Battle for Azeroth really is the first expansion which would be entirely under Ian's control, where he can exert a bit more of his influence over the direction of the game. So my question to you is, did you get the impression, and I know Ian is very much so, a vanilla baby, that's where he got famous, that's how he got to be where he is. Did you get the impression that Ian is sort of more invested than anyone else in the origins of the game, and it's something that he might want to be instilling on players to this day?
I think very much so. I agree with what Stay Safe said, that so he took over the reins as game director pretty shortly after, if I remember my timeline right, pretty shortly after Legion launched, and BFA is his first expansion with him really leading the charge as the game director for WoW. It's clear to me from that meeting, and also just from his public face, that he loves Warcraft and has always loved Warcraft, and from the very beginning was an invested player, was a hardcore raider through all of vanilla into Burning Crusade, and then pursued that passion for the game into the development world with Blizzard. And a lot of the same way as Jeff Kaplan, who was a super invested EverQuest player, and then joined the World of Warcraft team. And I have the highest regard for Jeff and his work, both with Warcraft and then now with Overwatch. Blizzard does a good job of how they recruit people. They recruit people who are gamers at heart, who are passionate about their work. One of their core values is in embracing your inner geek, and they represent that. So in my mind, Ian loves vanilla Warcraft, loves the structure of it and the things that it brings to the table. I would agree also that I think BFA has some touch points that it's a different game. The Battle for Azeroth, World of Warcraft, and the vanilla classic version are really completely separate games that share the same title in name only. But there's some inspirations in BFA that call back to classic, and I think those specifically are kind of the world PvP aspects. You're really incentivized now to go and engage people in world PvP. There are specific quests that tell you to go kill people in the world of the opposing faction. The whole lore of the expansion is Alliance versus Horde. So I think that this is his chance and him putting his thumb on the scale a little bit of bringing Warcraft back to some of the points that made it so popular to begin with.
It's interesting that you described the passion that you could feel coming from him. And is it something that, well, one thing that I should put to you is, it's fun and games for the hyperbolic classic fan to kind of say, Blizzard doesn't care about classic. They're just doing this to shut us up, blah, blah, blah. Having been in that room for so long and having dealt with the attitudes of the higher ups for the amount of time that you did, is that something that you can easily dispel? And I know you've touched on it a bit here, but is it quite clear to you that it's the opposite? Or would you say, no, maybe there was some, sort of laissez-faire yawning at some point?
I don't think that Blizzard does anything laissez-faire. They have to invest time and energy and resources, and there's always the opportunity cost when they're as big of a company as they are, that if they invest a lot of time and energy into one thing, it means that they're not investing it into something else. So I think it's just cynicalness that people say and try to dismiss that their work with Classic, that they're just going to throw something, patch it together and throw it up, and they're not going to invest a lot of time in the work. I think that's kind of foolish speak. I think that they care. I think they're going to make it as good as they possibly can and won't release it until they feel confident that it's going to be well received.
Just to wrap up on the meeting itself, you mentioned a couple of funnier moments off the cuff where you say that J. Allen Brack made the comment about you thought you wanted to meet me, but you didn't. And then you said Ian made the comment about Onyxia's breath. Were there any other really funny, memorable lines from that meeting?
Those are the two that really stand out to me. I think I alluded to earlier, there was a conversation between Mike and J. Allen about what information about vanilla they still had, and what that information was, and that was kind of illuminating to me. And that was the other thing that really stood out to me, and just kind of reminded me of just how far away they are how far away they were at that point from bringing Classic WoW to the forefront. The other thing is that, so the way that Blizzard as a whole has structured their company, their core values, their best practices, is that I would bet my life that Classic WoW servers are going to have full BattleNet integration, where you can whisper people who are playing StarCraft or Overwatch from the Classic WoW client. That has to be integrated as a whole into their BNet launcher. That's just I think that just is a given. And part of the work that they had to do is how can we take that 1.12 12-year-old content and make it work in the modern server architecture and modern coding and modern best practices, and with our modern tech, that it fits into, the business of Blizzard as a whole.
Moving on a little bit, now that we're talking a bit more about Classic and moving on from the meeting itself, and thank you so much for going into so much detail about that meeting. It definitely scratched the itch for me in terms of wanting to know a few more things about it. And I certainly do feel like I was a fly on the wall now. So thanks so much for that.
Good.
But now moving on to when Classic was eventually announced, can you please take us through, for the listeners' benefit, an explanation of the emotions that you must have felt when you finally saw that the project was official?
Yeah. So I actually emailed with Ian a little bit in between the year and a half, I guess, between when we had our meeting and when they finally announced BlizzCon. And it wasn't a long correspondence. It was a few emails back and forth. But I specifically asked him in the last email, could you tell me if you're going to announce Classic at this BlizzCon? And I didn't get a response. And then he initiated the response email after BlizzCon, apologizing that he couldn't tell me ahead of time. And that was a really special thing. And I actually emailed him again right as BFA launched, just wishing him good luck and congratulations on the launch of the game. And he answered back and just said thanks. But so to tell the story of the setting, at least, so I didn't have any forewarning that the announcement was coming. I was sitting in a Starbucks near my office and doing some work out of the office, and turned on the stream and had it like in a little corner of my screen as I was doing some work and listening to the announcement. And then Jay Allen starts talking about ice cream. And then immediately is maximize. What is he talking about? Can it be? Can it be? And then the cinematic hits with the gnome saying some people said that you couldn't go back again. And I immediately start crying, man. I was emotional. I'm a husband. I am a father of 2 kids, and having that has brought out a ton of emotion. So I cry frequently. So it's not that special that I cried. But I started tearing up in the middle of the Starbucks watching this thing that I care about so deeply become a reality. And that was crazy. I was spamming Discourse like, no way, is this happening? Don't mess with me, Jay Allen. Can it be? Yes. I was pumped. And I knew at that point that we were still a long way away from Classic actually becoming a thing. But it was a special moment.
Just hearing you tell that story, I'm the same as you. I'm hard to draw to tears, but now I'm sitting here wondering, like, is it dusty in this room or what? Like, where did all this dust come from? But tears, sort of very emotional, tearing up at almost hearing it. It must have been very special for you, I don't doubt. Now, after the announcement, what was the chatter between the core Nostalrius members about what was coming with Classic?
So the first immediate response was like, hey, let's release a statement saying we're excited for this, or we're proud if we could do anything. I made a few like Reddit comments just saying how excited I was. As a whole, so between the time of our meeting and when BlizzCon was announced, there was the private WoW server community continued to run as it was running. And through that process, Viper and Damon decided to disengage from that completely. So the actual connection between the whole Nostalrius core team is not as strong as it used to be. And that makes sense because we're not engaging with each other on a consistent basis. But we put together a statement that was in support of Classic WoW, and humbly excited that it was happening.
At this point, what are your hopes and dreams and thoughts or predictions for what we might get with Classic WoW?
Boy, that's a loaded question.
Sure is. Sorry.
So my hope is, I know a number of people who have been gaming. I'm still in connection with my original vanilla WoW Guild. Shout out to Eclipsed from Anetheron. We're still friends today. We still play WoW and other games together today. And I know a number of them are really excited for Classic to come out and never touch the private server because of the implications of what that would mean to play on a private server, that there was no security and their characters and their investment would go to zero. So they're very excited. A few of them at the very least, to play Classic WoW again. And my hope, not my hope, I know that there is thousands, potentially millions of other people who are just like them, who long to go back to the original WoW days and the version of the game that existed at that point, that they bought in 2004, 2005, whatever it was. And long to go back to that. And so I'm excited for them to be able to experience that in the most legitimate way possible, which is Blizzard leading the charge, Blizzard taking their baby and re-releasing it to the world in a fashion that's going to be fun and accessible and, really true to World of Warcraft.
Now, appreciating that you mentioned that you know absolutely nothing about what's to come with Classic, have you had any thoughts of your own, or do you get hit up with rumors and scuttlebutt from anyone else about what might be coming with World of Warcraft Classic?
I think a lot of the speculating and guessing of what Blizzard's going to do, they have to do this, they have to do that, they should do this, they should do that. I think it's mostly a useless exercise because we have no idea what they're going to do. We have no idea what they're planning to do as in terms of what content's going to be released, what's going to do this. So I don't presume to guess what they're going to do, but rather let them inform me what they're going to do. Now there's I listened to your podcast about the changes versus no changes, and there's strong opinions about specific things where people were saying, well, it's not Warcraft unless it's like XYZ. And in my mind, Blizzard's the only one that gets to say what Warcraft really is. Now we get to feel about Warcraft in whatever way we want, And if we decide that Blizzard's doing this, so I can't be involved, that's our individual choice. But I don't think that our opinion matters quite. Our individual opinions aren't really as important as we like to think that they are, and mine also. So I don't want to guess or speculate too much on what vanilla should be. I think what it should be, with that said, I think what it should be is it should be an accurate representation of what vanilla World of Warcraft was. And that's kind of the tagline that I put on it.
Now, once it does drop, what are your plans for the game?
Well, I'm going to play it, and I'm going to play. I'm gonna play a lot. So I'm gonna level a Warlock. So Team Warlock. I'm for the Alliance as well. I'll be playing with my guilds and with plans to level up, to gear up, to raids, to crush raids, to wipe Horde in Blackrock Mountain, and enjoy everything that vanilla World of Warcraft is.
I was almost all set up and bracing myself there for like a crying game-esque twist where I say, so you're going to play Classic? And you're like, no, I'm not going to play it. Like, that would have been an interesting turn. But thank you so much, basically. I know that we've only got, I've basically, let me say this. On behalf of the community, I just want to say that even though I'm not a spokesperson for the community, from myself personally, thank you so much for all the work that you and the team put in, because it's a situation where we wouldn't be getting World of Warcraft Classic if you had not put in the hard yards in the way in which you did and worked on Nostalrius, created this thing, helped work on it, and then develop it in a way that made Blizzard stand up and take attention. So I just want to say a big thank you for not only doing that, and then also for coming on the show and speaking with Countdown to Classic today.
That's very kind of you to say. We spent a lot of hours working on Nostalrius, and I'm humbled to know that I believe it did at the end make a difference in pushing Blizzard to make the decision for Classic, and that's a humbling feeling.
Fantastic. Well, Nano, look, I know we're both short on time today. We've both got to run, but thank you so much for coming on. If you ever want to come back on and talk about, Classic in the future, I haven't even asked you a number of questions that I'd love to get your thoughts on, but maybe later down the track we'll touch base again. But thank you so much for the talk today.
It was great being here. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll hopefully we don't have to count down too long.
Hopefully. All right. Thanks, mate.
All right. Take care.
And that's the call with Nano done, and I do hope that all of you enjoyed that as much as I did. Learning about what actually happened in the room was such a treat, and I do thank Nano again for taking the time out for Countdown to Classic, and also another shout out to Forrest for helping set all that up. Nano has said he might be happy to come back on another time to talk about a few other things when we have the time, and I'll be sure to take him up on that offer if we can work something out. But he was an absolute delight to deal with, so I'll be sure to see what I can do on that front for you all. But now that we've just started scratching that nostalgic itch for all of you, how about we keep it going with yet another dose of Memory Lane? In Memory Lane, Countdown to Classic takes you through some of the listeners' more funny or fond memories from World of Warcraft days gone by. And today we'll start with Sarge, who tells us this. My best memory of vanilla World of Warcraft. I already had a 60 hunter who just began to raid, but I leveled a Night Elf rogue together with my real-life friend who chose a Night Elf warrior for his first character. He couldn't play as much as I did back then. Therefore, we leveled rather slowly together, but one day something amazing happened. We even talk about it to this day, and both of us are so disappointed for the fact that we didn't record it with Fraps when it happened. Well, here's what happened. We were questing together in the Hinterlands, and both of us had level 49 characters. We just finished a Zul'Farrak run successfully and felt pretty good, so we decided to go and explore the Hinterlands. As probably everyone knows, there's a troll city deep in the Hinterlands filled with elite trolls where you have to go to finish some quests as Alliance. We fought our way through the elite trolls, and suddenly, as we were about 3/4 of the way to the top, as we had pulled a mob, 5 Hordes attacked us and killed us pretty quickly. We didn't even see them coming. There was a level 60 Hunter, 2 level 47s, a level 50 and a level 53. Suffice to say, we were furious because there was only one graveyard in the zone, and to get to our corpses, we had to ghost walk over 5 minutes. But guess what? We decided to get revenge on them, and for good. We still had all our cooldowns ready, and since I had a pretty good understanding of the game mechanics, I prepared my friend and told him what we have to do while we were walking. So we got our corpses back, buffed up, put some consumables on, and then I was going scouting for that horde filth. Luckily, all the mobs were gone until I reached them. My friend hid himself behind a wall and we waited for the right moment. Just as their warrior pulled, I sapped the hunter. Luckily, he didn't resist it. Blinded another one, and my friend charged the healer. The healer died instantly with recklessness from my warrior friend. Their tank didn't even know what was happening since he simply tried to tank the mob that he'd pulled. Once the healer was down, we went for the second one, and they also died pretty quickly. 2 down, and then the one who I'd blinded came and woke up, and I used Vanish to resap the 60 hunter and sprinted to the third one, which had engaged my friend, and this one forced my friend to use his potion cooldown, but we did bring him down as well, so 3 down. So there we were, the tank and the hunter still breathing, but the tank who had begun to hit on me was almost dead from the elite. He had around 30% life left and eventually also died, but I had to use a potion too. 4 down. Only the hunter left. We both used our bandages, and right as we finished, the hunter got out of the sap. We both went ham on him and used whatever we had left, which wasn't much, to bring him down. Unfortunately, he got me and I died. Only my friend was still going at him. And now, I'm not exaggerating whatsoever, it literally came to the last hit. Whoever striked first with the next hit was going to win. And I was screaming at my friend on TeamSpeak, "Kill him! Kill him!" And finally the last hit fell, and my friend was still standing with 3% HP and looked down on that level 60 Orc Hunter. It was wonderful. We both saw how the red names from above the corpses disappeared, and we knew we had our revenge. World PvP never felt better than this exact moment. All the way back to my corpse, I couldn't believe we actually did a 2 versus 5 with a level discrepancy and won it. We waited for the horde to kill us again, but they didn't show up. They aborted the whole thing. I was so proud of my friend that he played that well, and we showed those dirty horde filth how it is when real players play. I always laugh when those horde talk big about honor, etc., etc., when they deliberately choose to side along the invaders. Only a few truly skilled horde players have honor, but most of them choose horde to be the misfits that they can't be in real life. For the Alliance! The next submission comes from listener Minoru, who tells us the following. On August 5th, 2006, our server forums received a bombastic announcement. A high-end raiding guild was transferring to our server. To celebrate the occasion and mark themselves in server history, that post claimed that they would kill Thrall by midnight that night. Clearly, the Horde wasn't going to take that sitting down. It was short notice, but everyone in Orgrimmar started banding together. A raid was formed. Emissaries were sent to Thunderbluff and Undercity to request reinforcements. Scouts were placed in the surrounding zones to give advance warning of their approach. As we hurried through our preparations, the hour of reckoning drew near. At 11 p.m, the Alliance Guild attacked. Predictably, they used the western backdoor. They rode in on epic mounts, making a mad dash for Thrall's throne room. A few defenders tried to pick them off, but most of them made it inside and started their assault on Thrall. It wasn't a great plan considering the massive swarm of guards and other elites following them inside, plus the wave of Horde defenders flanking in from behind like a hammer striking an anvil. They were slaughtered. They made a few token secondary attempts to recover, but with an ever-increasing Horde presence, they knew the battle was lost. It was midnight and Thrall stood strong. The cherry on top was the very last person to retreat, a lone paladin who resurrected in the corner, then bubble-hearthed out to a crowd of sneering and cheering Horde. Part 2, the next day. After the Alliance attack on Thrall, I figured I'd do a little retaliation of my own. I wasn't the aggressive type, I was more of a friendly mischief maker. As a lone undead rogue, what could I do in response? The idea hit me. I'll pay a visit to every enemy main city and pick the faction leaders' pockets clean. At first, I was hesitant. Could I really pull it off? Faction leaders were raid bosses. Surely their stealth detection was off the charts. I thought I'd start small by going to Darnassus and testing the waters. I stealthed my way to Teldrassil, moseyed on up to Taronda, and picked her pockets for a handful of silver coins. I was shocked at how anticlimactic that was. It was almost too easy. I picked Fandral Staghelm's pockets too. I played Alliance for a short while and knew full well that that jerk deserved it. Next stop, Ironforge. I made my way in, but in trying to dodge the high amount of players, I accidentally got in range of a stealth-detecting guard. The guard threw a net at me and caused me to unstealth, and Alliance players were alerted to my presence. I was immediately hit with a moonfire, and attacks started to fly my way. As I started to panic, a friendly rival from the battlegrounds approached. The dwarven priest, Jezza stepped up and mind-controlled me. Suddenly friendly to the Alliance, the attacks against me were forced to stop. Jezza made me run around in circles around the mob of Alliance until the dots disappeared. Then the mind control broke. I immediately hit Vanish and Sprint and got out of there, towards Magni Bronzebeard. As Alliance spread around the city, I quickly circled in and swiped the dwarf's pockets for another handful of silver coins. I made sure to throw a slash hug to Jezza on my way out towards the Deep Run tram. I'm not sure if his aid was intentional or not, but he saved my life. I arrive in Stormwind and enter the keep. Unfortunately, no exciting event or daring escape here. I snuck up behind Bolvar and took his lunch money. I found a safe corner, much like the paladin from the night before, and hearthed home. While the end of my adventure was a bit underwhelming, it was the journey that counts. I set out with a goal that I wasn't sure was possible at first, and ended the day with a mission accomplished. Next we have this one from listener Cryptic, who tells us the following. So I remember discovering RFD for the first time. I was roughly a 36 rogue at the time, and I always thought the Great Lift was really cool. It was definitely the highest point in the world that I had seen. Anyway, I picked a rogue because they had all sorts of unique perks that made you feel like a true assassin. One of those perks that I was excited for was Safe Fall. Once I hit level 40 and skilled it, I was excited to try it out by jumping off the Great Lift. After all, it made you so you don't take falling damage. Or so I thought. So I gathered a group of my guildies to go to the Southern Barrens and run RFD because I absolutely had to have the Cold Rage dagger. When we arrived, I told them I'd be right there. I just wanted to try out Safe Fall by jumping off the Great Lift. Nobody said anything. After jumping off, I hit the bottom and died. It took me a minute to realize what had happened. I reread the fine print and found out that it doesn't make you immune to falling damage like I previously thought. The whole time my guildies were just laughing their asses off. It took me a while to live that one down. Next we have this one from listener Viv, who tells us this. I'd like to tell the story of how I got into World of Warcraft in the first place and about how my real-life circumstances dictated my gameplay experience in vanilla. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. My parents were very much into the country life and did not see a point in having all kinds of technology. I didn't even have a computer until the time my first MMO, Final Fantasy XI, was about to come out. Since I was also getting ready to go to college, I convinced my parents to let me get a PC. Given that this was back in the early 2000s, the only internet that was available in most rural places was dial-up. I had 28.8 kilobyte per second dial-up because 56k wasn't bad enough. However, back then, MMOs were designed with dial-up users in mind. I was able to play FF11 despite some disconnects. Eventually, my hard drive stopped working and I couldn't buy a new one for a while, so I ended up forcibly quitting that game. By the time I got enough money to buy a new hard drive, I started seeing things about World of Warcraft coming out. I anticipated its release like I'm currently anticipating World of Warcraft Classic's release. For some reason, I knew it was going to be an amazing game. I quickly hopped in the open beta a month or two later and was happy to see I could play with my garbage internet. Although I still have fond memories of FF11 and playing it on a private server even today, I guess I have the explosion of my hard drive to thank for ever playing World of Warcraft in the first place. When live servers hit, I was already hooked. After getting to 60 on my paladin and realizing everyone wanted them to be healers, I re-rolled to no mage and got 60 on that instead because I'd encountered many mages while leveling and thought that they looked fun to play. I wasn't wrong. Mage became my main for all of vanilla and I never looked back. But with my internet, I couldn't do 40-man content because I would lag so hard that everything on screen would freeze. Then I would disconnect. I really couldn't do much more than 15-man dungeons. Although my internet prevented me from raiding, I fell in love with PvP. I PvP'd non-stop, spamming games of Warsong Gulch for hours and hours every day with neckbeard levels of addiction. My internet could handle Warsong Gulch just fine. All I did every day was log on and play. I simply found Warsong Gulch to be so much fun that it's all I ever wanted to do. However, having dial-up, I also could not get on voice chat because I would go full robot mode when I talked, and half the time I couldn't understand what anyone was saying. Similarly, loading web pages took ages, so I rarely wanted to look up anything online. All the information I ever received in vanilla came from word of mouth from my PvP friends, or from my large amount of time playing the game. Considering often that I would be playing solo in PvP because others would be raiding or doing some content that I couldn't do, and considering I wasn't on voice chat where often people exchange information about the game rather than typing it, I was fairly ignorant on a lot of stuff in the game. I knew practically nothing about the raids, and I didn't fully understand how the rank system worked. All I knew about ranking is that I had to play it a lot, and if I played a lot, I got more rank points. So here I was, a hardcore PvPer constantly playing games of Warsong Gulch with the occasional Arathi basin thrown in. What everyone says about PvP before cross-server technology was implemented is true. Eventually, as I began to get closer to my goal of rank 13, not only did I know all the regular Horde PvPers, but I started realizing that they knew me as well. This brings me to the reason I had to give you all that background information. Yesterday, I had a sudden vivid flash of memory of two separate whispers I got from Horde players who logged on alts. The first one was a whisper that said, "By fire be purged," after we had just fought a battle. My response was, huh? Because I had no clue what he was talking about, having never raided Molten Core past the first couple trash pools where I DC'd from all the crap going on. It was only years later that I understood the reference. The second whisper was from someone who said hi to me, and we had a little chat where I ended up telling him that I had dial-up. His response was something like, "I always thought you were a talented player that just had slower reaction times. I assumed you were always high or something." I had a laugh about that one. Eventually, one of the best Horde PvP guilds on the server, Mal'Ganis, ended up re-rolling to Alliance because their queue times were extremely long due to the massive faction imbalance thanks to Goon Squad and elitist jerks. I had some crazy battles against those guys when they were Horde, though, and it turned out they were nice people and great to play the game with. Shout out to the Horde Guild Keen Formation. They were beasts. Anyway, This about brings my trip down memory lane to a close. Eventually, I moved out and got real internet. Then, years later, I found out that Nostalrius was a thing, and I got to play Vanilla WoW again with broadband. It was so much more enjoyable. I got to raid Molten Core and Onyxia on a regular basis. Unfortunately, my work schedule changed and I had to stop raiding with my guild. That sort of demotivated me from playing for a while. When I went to return, I found out Nostalrius was shut down, and I was bummed out. I ended up signing their petition to Blizzard and campaigned for vanilla for months after. In the meantime, Elysium came out and I started over and raiding the same two places again. Then, server corruption happened and I just quit playing. So, I've still never raided BWL and beyond, but I won't play private servers anymore because I'm waiting for the real thing from Blizzard. It's what I've always wanted anyway. I'm looking forward to finally doing all the raids. Who knows, maybe I'll hit rank 14 instead of 13 this time too. Thanks for bearing with me through a very long story. Next we have this one from listener Don't Stop, who says this. Unfortunately, one of my most vivid memories in World of Warcraft was getting called out for being a dirty, dirty gold buyer. Starting square one, I started playing in vanilla about patch 1.08. I was in middle school and had access, but not permission to use, my parents' credit card. I ended up buying about $300 worth of online gold in a furious effort to get my level 40 mount on my hunter. I had a bad habit of buying auction house items and no clue what farming meant. I look back and cringe when I remember having my level 50 marksman hunter walking into Western Plaguelands. As soon as I walk in, I feel like hot shit with my hurricane bow equipped, but like even hotter shit because of my dual-wield flurry axes with Crusader enchant. That's right, double flurry axes with Crusader enchant on a marksman hunter. I remember the enchanter trying to talk me out of it and recommending a different enchant. But no, the colour and legendary strength of Crusader enchant was too much. Another player called me on it and called me a noob while on the southern pass into Western Plaguelands. I remember vividly telling him to fuck off and that he was jealous of my sweet loot. I like to think I've come a long way since then. Now, that's about it for Memory Lane, but I will also direct you to another submission that is in the Memory Lane channel of the Countdown to Classic Discord. And please do join the Countdown to Classic Discord if you haven't already. There is a boatload of us there, listeners just like you, and we're speaking every day about World of Warcraft Classic, and they are an amazing bunch of intelligent and insightful people. So please do come along and join us and join in on the fun with Countdown to Classic. But if you go to the Memory Lane channel there, you'll find an epic submission from listener Artrus, who gives a phenomenal account of his time back in the day with World of Warcraft. So I do encourage you to please go over and read that there. It was just a little too long. Apologies to Artrus to put in the show, even though I did read another very long one, but his was even longer. So I decided just to shout it out this way. But how about a bit of cleanup as well? On the show occasionally I do like to read out listener emails with feedback, and this one came from listener Beatstick, who says the following. Hi Josh, that was an excellent debate about the changes and no changes, and that helped solidify some points and sway others for me. Well done to all. A couple of things I took away from that. One, I liked the idea of the complete game edition, with all quests brought through to completion. There's nothing worse than doing an arduous chain only to end up at the end person, and after spending ages tracking the person down, there's no hand in. Winterspring had one if I recall, but there were many loose ends. And two, 1.13 would be okay if there were no gear progression. Like Guild Wars 2, you gear your character up and take 18 months off, and you can jump in at the same level you left and not be a step behind. Keep it cosmetic gear or side upgrades such as items with random effects like vanilla is famous for. This would have to be tightly controlled. It would stink to come back from a break and not recognize any of the chat. You might as well go and play another MMO for that experience. These two steps are countered by the fishhook. Any change will make it un-vanilla-like and will lead to, this isn't vanilla noobs. Back in real vanilla, you had to mail one item, heal as a paladin, farm Dire Maul, fly the long way, get world buffs, etc., etc. Do we want a good complete game or one where we never have to hear those statements from the purists? I'll be playing either way. And I just want to say thank you very much to Beatstick for that feedback. I really do appreciate it when people comment on the show and send me emails like that. And I do feel obliged, obviously. If you put the time in to comment on the show like that, I'll put the time in for you to read it out on the show. So just to pick up where Beatstick left off, yes, I do agree that there were some phenomenal points raised on the changes versus no changes debate. On the 1.13 point, I do think that it's a funny situation. I sort of sit on the fence with this one, which obviously doesn't please anyone, but I'm fine with there being a 1.13 if they do split the servers up. I know a lot of people have said that already, but as long as there's servers where I can stick to vanilla, but also, if they want to do 1.13, then they can on another server, that's fine. Give us the option. I really do, with 1.13, I think it's a funny situation because I do agree with people, and particularly as John Stats said on the recent interview, it's going to be funny in that you don't build an MMO just to basically die after 2 or 3 years. If they're doing Classic seriously, at a certain point, after about 3 years, we're all going to be asking a question of like, okay, we've done it. What next? Well, you could roll an alt, or you're going to be asking for more content. And I think a lot of the people realistically who are saying, no, keep vanilla, at a certain point, may change their tune. Not all of them. I think some, after 3 years of playing through Classic, might be like, all right, maybe I'm a little bit more open to if they can keep it like a vanilla-esque vibe, I might, take a look. I don't know. I just think that if they did a patch 1.13, some people might be open to the concept if it's on another server. But anyway, that's just a really quick take. I'm more than happy to go into my more prolonged take another time. But anyway, that's cleanup. That's memory lane. That's everything for the show for the day, everyone. But just before I let you go, I just want to shout out to the members of the Countdown Council, as we do: Flozy B, Palfurus, Permadrunk, Rarebit, the Anton, Wilson Ma, and Valaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would simply not be the same without your support. And also a big thank you to supporters Bossman764, Hurlbert, Good Kisser, Myrtlebanks, Purgatos81, and Zudamos, as always. You'll next hear from the show on Monday, when I'll be playing you a fun little interview with listener Shriken all about Dire Maul, which includes some tips and tricks and general chat and commentary on dungeon crawling through what is a relatively beloved instance in the game. On Thursday, you'll be hearing about the Law of the Barons, which will also include a very special piece of Countdown to Classic original content, as the show conducts the most thorough investigation ever undertaken into who really killed Mancrick's wife, with the assistance of real-life homicide detective and Countdown listener Riv. So keep an ear out for that one. It's a great one. But until then, I've been Josh, signing off down under. Have a great weekend, everyone.